My name is Christopher Frayling. I'm the biographer of Sergio Leone, and this time it's for a few dollars more. Sergio Leone's second Western begins with a whistling noise off-screen and the sound of a rifle being cocked and of a cigar being lit. So we know from Fistful of Dollars that this is Clint Eastwood just off-screen, but we can't see him. In fact, it was Sergio Leone himself, the director, who was doing the whistling and the fiddling about, a sort of directorial appearance. And he's on a ledge in Almeria. Actually, it's north of Tabernas, where the main set was, with the Los Filabres Mountains in the background. And quite a lot of Hollywood westerns, like The Bounty Hunter, that was made in the 1950s, began with a baddie on the ledge and the good guy in the valley being shot at. But this reverses it. We have the good guy shooting at an unknown person down in the valley, shoots him off his horse. And the smoke from the cigar turns into the lettering for a few dollars more. And then the lettering, instead of being smoke, turns into a target on a wire, which is a moving target to try and avoid the rifle shots of the bounty hunter who's on the ledge to the right. Much more confident credit titles than had been in Fistful of Dollars, with everyone using their own names, whereas in Fistful of Dollars a lot of them have been hiding under pseudonyms. The soundtrack theme is, if anything, even more extreme. The whistling, the drum beats, the maranzano, the Jew's harp, the incomprehensible lyric from the choir, the bell, the whip cracks, and the Fender Stratocaster guitar. It's a new kind of main theme for a Western, which would have tended traditionally to be much more orchestral and lush and folk music-y. This is a rock and roll soundtrack at an even higher volume than Fistful of Dollars. I once asked one of the performers what the lyric actually says, and even he couldn't remember, even though he performed it. It's something like "We can fight," or "We defy," or "In the wind," but it doesn't actually matter. It's just a sound, the human voice used as yet another musical instrument. Much of the same team has produced Fistful of Dollars, the same designer, Carlo Simi, the same composer, Ennio Morricone, the same director of photography, Massimo Dallamano, and as we'll see, a lot of the same repertory company of actors as appeared in Fistful of Dollars. It was filmed almost exactly a year after Fistful of Dollars. It was put together quite quickly in the wake of the success of Fistful of Dollars and was originally to be called The Bounty Killer. And they changed the title to For a Few Dollars More because of the success of the first film. It's the perfect sequel title, Fistful of Dollars, For a Few Dollars More. And it was watching this moment of Sergio Leone's name being shot that actually convinced Eli Wallach later to appear in The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, because he realized the director must have a hell of a sense of humor if he can put up his name in credit titles like that. The message of the first title is that there's no law in this land. All the sheriffs are corrupt, so the bounty hunters make their own law. And it begins with a shot of the Bible. In fact, in the shooting script, it was a shot of Lord Byron's poems to show that the person behind it is a cultivated kind of man. But in this, it's the Bible. And so, for a moment, we think this might be a priest.
Thank you. Tickets? Is it far to Tucumcari? We should pass there in about 3 or 4 minutes.
This was shot on the train from the Guadix to Almeria line. It was the first locomotive in a Leone Western, a sign already that the budget was very much larger than Fistful of Dollars. And the voice behind the Bible is that of Lee Van Cleef, veteran Hollywood actor who'd appeared in many, many Hollywood Westerns, but usually as the second bad guy from the left who got killed in the second or third reel. He'd been knifed in Gunfight at the OK Corral, he'd been shot in The Bravados, he'd been shot in High Noon, which was his first film, and he was just the guy with the nasty face who played the bad guy. And the part that he's playing was originally slotted for Lee Marvin or Robert Ryan or Charles Bronson or Henry Fonda, but Leone remembered that face of Lee Van Cleef from watching Hollywood movies in his youth. So he went over, he found him. In fact, Van Cleef had virtually retired from the movies. The last film he'd made was in 1962, How the West Was Won, a silent part where he didn't even have a line of dialogue. He'd had a terrible car crash in the late 50s, which meant that his left knee was crushed. So Lee Van Cleef was in a bad shape, but Leone wanted that face, wanted that profile, wanted that look. It's a classic example of European cineasts having a very long memory. And suddenly, Lee Van Cleef makes the best entrance he'd ever made in the movies.
Hey, mister, you just can't pull the emergency cord and jump off. Tell me, why'd you stop that train? If you want to get off, you... Well...
And already, there's more of an emphasis on parody and comedy than in the first Dollars film. The script was largely written by Luciano Vincenzoni, who specialized in social comedies and witty films. His greatest film was made in the late 1950s, La Grande Guerra, The Great War, which was a rather cynical comedy about two layabouts in the First World War. And that sort of parody, comedy feeling to the script runs throughout it. It's one of the things that makes this film distinctive. The telegraph man is played by Roberto Camadiel, Spanish actor who subsequently specialized in Mexican bad guys in low-budget Italian westerns.
Guy passed by here in person and added on those 2 zeros. He was spitting mad when he saw what they was offering. He wasn't flattered. He said, a measly $1,000 for me is much too little. I'm worth a lot more than that. That's right, he said that. And then he added the zeros on the 1,000. There isn't anyone got the guts to face that killer, eh?
Van Cleef is dressed like a specialist. He wears a cape, a frock coat, like the gambler in a traditional Hollywood film. In fact, Leone put at the beginning of the shooting script, he should look a little bit like the Clark Gable character in Gone with the Wind, a sort of a gambler figure who's a specialist bounty hunter, with the emphasis on the hunter, as we'll see. He carries an arsenal with him, like a professional hunter going on safari. Enters the saloon, the piano player stops playing. It's a moment we've seen in countless westerns, and it's almost a send-up. These are hallowed moments from the traditional western being reworked almost as comedy.
Where is he? Huh? Where is he?
The film was dubbed post-synchronized because Italian popular movies, indeed any Italian movies, didn't use direct sound. So the actors of various nationalities, Spanish, Italian, American, West German, would usually speak their own language, and the track would be laid on in post-synchronization, which is why you sometimes get this mismatch between the lip movements of the minor characters and the words that are coming out of their mouths. Slight continuity error here. The zeros were added on the first wanted poster in the shot a couple of scenes ago, and they seem to have disappeared on this one. And we're about to see a rerun of a sequence from a 1950s Hollywood Western called The Bounty Hunter by Andre de Toth, where Randolph Scott comes out of a hotel room, the guy he's hunting jumps off the balcony, goes into the street, and rides off. Only this is a rather more extreme version of it. It's also a kind of version of Leone's slightly vulgar form of comedy. Pardon me, ma'am, the lady in the bath. There's lots of gags about hotels in this movie, with hoteliers and rather buxom ladies. And here we have the specialist with his arsenal. A Winchester, a buntline special, a pinfire double-barreled rifle, a whole arsenal of things for this hunter to get his prey. He's a very different kind of bounty hunter to the Clint Eastwood character. And this is one of the first dead horses in the history of the Western. Somehow everyone shot people in Westerns, but the horse always survived. But in this one, the horse is lying in the street. Another slight continuity problem, the prey, Calloway, doesn't have a moustache, even though on the wanted poster he does. He seems to have lost his moustache between when the poster went up and when he went to the hotel. Tucumcari, the town, was in fact the redressed set of Fistful of Dollars at Manzanares, north of Madrid, which was reused for just these sequences. It was already an old Western set when Fistful of Dollars moved into it, and here it is being recycled as the Mexican town of Tucumcari. And generally in this film, the Mexican towns south of the border are rather run down and impoverished, and there's no sense of affluence, whereas north of the border, towns like El Paso and White Rocks are much more affluent and have much more of a sense of a thriving community. But we're now south of the border.
$1,000. What do you know about Kavanaugh? About a week ago, he was seen at White Rocks. Thanks. If it's of any interest to you, somebody else dropped in to see me about him. Who? I never seen him before. His name is, Manco.
Now, interesting name for Clint Eastwood. Manco in Spanish means one-handed. In the Italian version, he's known as Monco, which sounds like Monaco, the monk, and in the American version, he's the man with no name. He's a different character to the character in the first Dollars film, where he was a masterless samurai, a sort of saddle tramp who wandered around the Southwest. Now he's become a professional bounty hunter. He enters the town of White Rocks in America, and the rain starts as he arrives, going under the town, sort of purifying rain as Eastwood rides into town. Whereas Van Cleef entered the movie on a train, Eastwood enters it on foot, and he lights his trademark cheroot with his left hand, making sure that his gun hand is free in case anything happens. Wearing the same poncho, the same hat, the same gun belt, the same pistol grips, which Eastwood brought from the set of the television series Rawhide when he first went to Spain for the second movie. He's wearing all those things again. And this saloon in White Rocks, Leone famously said to the properties people and the designers, I want this to be really smoky. Usually, saloons in Hollywood films are too well scrubbed, too clean, too overlit. I want lots of fire, wood-burning stove, lots of cigars. I want it so that people go, they're choking in there. More smoke, more smoke. And that's what he got.
Right? You know Baby Kavanaugh? Tell me, you know where I can find him?
There. At that table. He's got his back to you.
So we've seen Lee Van Cleef go after his prey, the man in the hotel in Tucumcari, and now we see Eastwood, the other bounty hunter, go after his prey, Kavanaugh. And the whole first 20 minutes of this movie is introducing the rivalry between the two bounty hunters. It takes about 20 minutes for the plot to get going. The point of these scenes is simply to introduce us to the characters, to have them doing parallel things to one another, and to see their different personalities through the way they react to situations. Van Cleef, the cold, robotic specialist, the hunter, the man in the cape, the man who dresses very nattily and reads the Bible. Eastwood, the bounty hunter with a sense of humour, the stylish man with the cheroot and the poncho. And we'll see what he does with violence in a moment. He wears a leather gauntlet on his gun hand, which there's all sorts of business with throughout the film, and that might have something to do with Manco, the Spanish, one-handed, that he uses his right hand as a gun hand, because there's lots of rather obscure play with this leather gauntlet. The two movies that Leone acknowledged from Hollywood that this film was a homage to were firstly Robert Aldrich's 1950s film Vera Cruz, which starred Burt Lancaster and Gary Cooper as two mercenaries in Mexico during the period of Benito Juarez. And Gary Cooper is a Southern major. He's a sort of patrician figure, rather like Van Cleef. And Burt Lancaster is a footloose, smiley, ironic kind of figure who's rather similar to the Clint Eastwood character. So that was the first reference. And in fact, Burt Lancaster wears a leather gun gauntlet in Vera Cruz, which is similar to Eastwood's. And the second was the Henry King film, The Bravados, which is all about a sheriff, played by Gregory Peck, hunting down the people who killed his wife. And one of the people he hunts down is Lee Van Cleef, and one of the key pieces of evidence is a chiming pocket watch, which leads him to all the different characters, the gang who were involved in killing his wife. And as we'll see, the chiming pocket watch is a key to this film as well. We see the man with no name inventing karate at this point. I don't think in the Wild West that many people would have used karate, but Eastwood seems to be quite good at it.
Alive or dead, it's your choice.
There's a great Leone visual gag now. The man who's been to the barber shop and only half his beard has been shaved off. It's a kind of comic strip gag, and you get lots of visual gags of that kind in this movie. And it's a vague reference to the Fritz Lang film Union Pacific, where there is a shootout involving a man who's being shaved in a barber shop at an Italian barber's, and it was a favourite scene of Sergio Leone. And this film is full of references to Hollywood movies, but transformed into a completely different universe, this strange nihilistic universe of bounty hunters and no law and weak sheriffs. And here we have a particularly weak sheriff in a sequence that's very like High Noon, where the tin star is thrown into the dust, a sequence that irritated John Wayne so much. Well, we have a replay of that here.
Tell me, isn't the sheriff supposed to be courageous, loyal, and above all honest?
Yeah, that he is.
I think you people need a new sheriff.
So the lawmaker is the bounty hunter. He's above the sheriff. You people need a new sheriff. White Rocks was this town was filmed at Colmenar near Madrid, a standing western set, not the Fistful of Dollars set, a different one which had been built, and so White Rocks was set there. And you get many towns in this film, whereas Fistful of Dollars was set in one town, San Miguel. You get White Rocks, you get Tucumcari, you get El Paso, which we'll see in a minute, an entire thriving town. You get Agua Caliente, a Mexican town towards the end. So there's a whole variety of sets and different kinds of town. Some symbol really of the size of the budget of this film, which was about $600,000. A huge quantum leap for Sergio Leone. The plot begins here with a bunch of Mexicans springing the bad guy from jail. The interior was filmed at Cinecittà Studios in Rome, and the exterior with the steps was actually the bull ring at Almeria, where the interior of the bull ring has these the steps we'll see in a minute. So rather a complicated matching between an interior shot in Rome and an exterior in a seaside town in Spain. The chimes are interesting, a musical clue which will lead us into the entire plot of the film, because basically there's two stories going on. There's the bounty hunters, the older bounty hunter, Colonel Mortimer, the Southern colonel played by Lee Van Cleef, on the one hand, and the young, reckless Clint Eastwood character, the man with no name, Manco, on the other. And that's one story that holds this together. But the other is the bad guy whom we're about to meet, how he sprung from jail, and how there's a revenge story involving him and Lee Van Cleef. And those two stories kind of intertwine with one another throughout the film. But the chiming watch and the sound of bells relates very much to the revenge theme, as we'll see. And in the end, it's the chime and the watch that is the final clue that explains what the whole film has been about. So already in the introduction to the character, we get a subtle musical clue that you only pick up on second viewing to what's to come. Our introduction to El Indio, the bad guy, played by Gian Maria Volonté, who'd played Ramon, the bad guy in Fistful of Dollars. Only this bad guy is much more extreme. In the original version of the script, he was known as Tombstone. He's extremely destructive, extremely violent, and he also smokes marijuana, the first reference to marijuana in a mainstream movie, which has a fairly extreme effect on him as well. I'm not sure that the producers quite understood what marijuana does to people, but that comes a little bit later. But he's a very extreme guy. Indio, a Mexican Indian, played by Gian Maria Volonté, who kills without any bat of his eyelash. Some of the brutality associated with that Indio was thought to be so extreme in 1965 that the British censor trimmed aspects of this film, particularly where El Indio looks as though he enjoys killing. In Hollywood, there was a convention in the Hayes office that you never showed the gun in the same shot as the person being shot. You couldn't tie them together. You had to have a shot of the gun firing, and then you cut away and see the result of the gun. But Leone didn't know any of these Hollywood rules, so he has lots and lots of shots of people shooting people, and they fall down in the same shot, which, of course, has now become conventional. Indio and his gang have no compunction about shooting every guard in sight in a massacre in the prison, simply in order to spring their leader.
Open it. Senor.
This time, Volonté dubbed his own voice. In the first film, they used someone else's voice for the English language track. But in this film, he was contractually obliged to use his own voice, and he couldn't actually speak English, so he had to learn it phonetically. So the lines that Indio speaks are actually learnt by someone who isn't bilingual. So these are the bits in the Almeria bull ring with the steps. That was the set that they used.
You, come along. I'm letting you leave, hero. That's so you can tell everybody you've seen what takes place here.
So Indio is a bit of a maniac. He tends to laugh manically at moments of extreme tension. And now the first 20 minutes of introducing us to the two bounty hunters and the plot of El Indio gets tied together in an extraordinary visual sequence. Here's the wanted poster, the hand of Clint Eastwood, the face of Clint Eastwood with his trademark cigar and stubble. Back to Indio's wanted poster. Cut to the other bounty hunter, looking at the same wanted poster, only he's smoking a pipe, a straight-brimmed black hat, the specialist. Gunshots on the soundtrack. Face of Van Cleef. Eyes of Van Cleef. And the characters are tied together entirely visually in a piece of cinematic style that has nothing to do with reality. It's just a piece of cutting, and it's a really flamboyant example of Leone's technical style. He's beginning to gain confidence, and this movie is showing Leone's technique really coming to full fruition. This scene was filmed in a church in the hills above Tabernas, where the main set was. It's a 16th century church called Santa Maria at Torrillas, and it was a derelict church at the time, and they dressed it with lots of pillars and Baroque angels and all this kind of Hispanic material in it to make it look more cluttered. And within it, we have the traditional Madonna and Child. The child is, in fact, played by Leone's youngest daughter, Francesca, who'd recently been born, and this is her first appearance in a movie, and the mother is wearing the traditional Madonna shawl.
That's why I feel your family is partly mine. I'll take my part now. Outside.
They're both innocent. Please let them go. I was the one, you know that.
the first appearance of the chiming pocket watch, which will become incredibly important to the plot, with Leone-style close-ups of some of the other members of the gang, lit as if they're in some kind of Renaissance painting inside this 16th century church. But then there's two shots, so this is an extremely unpleasant moment of off-screen violence because both the mother and the child have been shot on Indio's orders in order that Tommaso, the victim, should get really angry and agree to face El Indio in a duel inside a church. And the kind of religious iconography of Fistful of Dollars, which was there, the crosses, the crucifixes, the coffins, the bells, the churches, the bell towers, really comes into its own in this, where you take the iconography of Roman Catholicism, a church interior, with the pulpit, with the angels, with all the other accoutrements of a Renaissance church, only it's the setting for a duel.
Or do you think you can?
And this is the first of Leone's real duels, the classic Leone duels in cinema, where the music is playing, and when the music stops, they have to draw their weapons. So it's a chance for a piece of cinematic rhetoric as it's cut to the music by Morricone. And it begins with Spanish guitar played very close to the microphone, which is in fact Indio's theme in the film. It's always associated with Indio. And a series of cuts as they stand, these rituals that precede the moment of shooting. So the choir comes in on top of the Spanish guitar, and then an organ toccata, which is based on Bach's Toccata and Fugue in D minor. So you've got a full-fledged church organ playing, taking up the theme that accompanies this duel. It is an extraordinary combination of music and image. Religious iconography, church music. And all of this to create a ritual that precedes the moment of shooting in a duel. Now, some other directors were interested in that moment of violence in the duel itself, but Leone wasn't. He was interested in the rituals that precede that moment, the sort of settling of accounts, looking at people's eyes, looking at their faces, looking at their hands, to see how much they reveal or give away about whether they can keep their nerve. There's a lot of face-offs of this kind in Leone's cinema, and this was the first. The moment itself happens very quickly, almost like in an old-fashioned Western. Members of Indio's gang were played by a number of the repertory company of Leone, which he'd assembled for Fistful of Dollars. But we've just seen Aldo Sambrel playing Cuchillo, the knife, in Spanish. And there's Benito Stefanelli, the stunt director, who plays Luke or Huey, one of the gringo members of Indio's gang. Mario Brega, the fat guy who played Chico in, there he is, in Fistful of Dollars, plays Niño, meaning little child in Spanish, in this film. And as we'll see, for the West German interest, the extraordinary actor Klaus Kinski plays Wild, or the Wild One, the hunchbacked member of the gang, who will appear later on in a lot of comedy-style sequences. This was Klaus Kinski's first international success, and as a result of viewing this film, the director David Lean cast Kinski in Dr. Zhivago.
Check those figures again.
Yes, sir.
Good day, sir. Good afternoon.
Mortimer. Douglas Mortimer.
Mortimer. Virginia, isn't it?
This is the first time we've been introduced to Colonel Mortimer by name. Up to now, he's been the bounty hunter with no name who clutches a Bible.
Oh, but exactly.
Yeah. The largest and most secure bank in the territory.
Well, Mr. Mortimer, I want to assure you our bank here has everything.
The production design by Carlo Simi, who was Leone's production designer on Fistful of Dollars, is much, much more elaborate than it was in the first Dollars film. Much more clutter, much more detail, much more of a sense of the material culture of the Wild West. Leone himself collected antiques with a special emphasis on 18th century antiques. His father had been an antiques collector before him, but his father, during the fascist regime of the 1930s and 40s, had to sell the family collection. And Leone made it part of his purpose in life to reassemble a family collection of antique crafts. And so there's this huge emphasis on textures and craftsmanship and objects in the back, a kind of peep show view of history. And here we are at the main set of the movie, El Paso, designed by Carlos Simi and built near Tabernas in Almeria. It's still there. Today it's called Mini Hollywood, and it's a very, very solid set indeed. An entire western town with side streets, with theatre, with laundry, with bank, with all the usual shops. The biggest set that Leone had been responsible for up to now, designed by the architect Carlo Simi, who'd been a production designer since the late 1950s, but had specialised in architecture. And this was the breakthrough movie that brought him to international attention. The production design of Leone's films is an important part of their impact. There's something strange about it. It doesn't quite look like a Hollywood movie. It's a Spanish location, and there's something slightly different about the way the drawings and the buildings are put together.
Married?
Yes, but she doesn't care.
When Leone commissioned El Paso, which of course is north of the line in Texas, he said to Carlos Simi, "I want it to be one of the main actors in the film."
That's the bank. As soon as I get some money, I'll put it in.
When Luciano Vincenzoni, the scriptwriter, was first approached, he was a little bit apprehensive about writing a Western. He'd never written one before. There was a treatment that he was presented with, which was then called The Bounty Killer, and it was his job to do the dialogue and to turn it into a proper screenplay. And so Vincenzoni said, well, how can I identify with the Western? I've never lived in the Wild West. I've never been over to America very often. So, Leone said, treat it as a children's game. As if these strange rituals that these grown men do to each other, whether it's duels or trying to best each other or trying to be macho or trying to confront each other, treat it as if they're young children in a suburb of Rome trying to be macho and face up to each other, and then it'll all make sense. So the whole thing was treated as a children's game, and that's what persuaded Vincenzoni to take on the script. And there's a lot of emphasis in this film on children watching as these grown men do such childish things.
Help you, sir?
I want the room right above.
I'm sorry, it's occupied. It's too bad. The hotel's filled to capacity. I'm sorry, the room you want is our best. It's always occupied.
By who?
Check the register.
Mary is played by Mara Krupp, a German actress who subsequently appeared in Fellini's film Satyricon, and according to Leone, strongly resembled the wife of a producer that he didn't like very much. So he makes a lot of fun of her in this film. There's a lot of fun is made of minor officials and hoteliers and sheriffs and clerks and bellboys in this film in a sort of traditional comedic way. They're caricatures. They're like cartoon characters almost. And a lot of the comedy in the film is at their expense. Sometimes quite bitter, actually, but they haven't got much time for these small characters. It's big heroes, superheroes, that this film is really about. The rest are comedy background. And here's another Leone hotel gag. Instead of the lady in the bathtub, we've got the man who's been ejected from his room because Clint Eastwood wants to stay there. And there's a nice twist in the tale to do with his underwear.
No, Mary, the bill. I like to stay on that.
Don't go, Mr. Martinez.
Paso immediately. I have an appointment elsewhere.
Martinez.
Yes, senor, what do you want?
I don't wear them.
I don't wear them. There's a series of Eastwood throwaway lines in this film, culminating in one at the end. I thought I was having trouble with my adding, which is probably the most famous one-liner in the film, that are, of course, the origin of the Clint Eastwood hard one-liners that he developed when later he went back to America. So phrases like "make my day" and "do you feel lucky, punk" start here with these throwaway lines that Vincenzoni wrote for Eastwood in the second of the Dollars films. Leone is getting more confidence as a director, Vincenzoni is enjoying the comedy, Simi is getting more confidence as a designer, and the mature Leone film is coming out of its cocoon before our very eyes.
Watch this.
Another religious reference, the shooting of the bell to warn people that someone's coming, to signal their arrival. Instead of pressing the doorbell or banging on the door, you shoot the church bell. There's Klaus Kinski. Benito Stefanelli. And entering is a new member of the gang, Groggy, played by Luigi Pistilli, an Italian theatre actor who subsequently went on to play Father Ramirez, very memorably in The Good, the Bad and the Ugly the following year.
Sancho. If you're waiting for Sancho, I'll go and come back in about 4 years. He's in prison. For 4 years. No amor, no dinero, no son. Bad for him. Not so bad for the rest of us. Man who gets caught doesn't deserve respect, huh?
Not a sensible thing to say to Indio, who of course has been caught. But the moment passes.
A bank at El Paso. Let's see. We'll say this is the inside of the bank.
Now, Indio, in explaining to his gang that they're going to rob the bank in El Paso, which is the bank in the neighborhood, cross the border into the United States and rob the Bank of El Paso, tells it like a parable in church. An extraordinarily kind of profane idea that in order to explain how to break into this bank and how the plan will all work, instead of doing it in the usual sort of back garage or in someone's home, it's actually treated as a parable inside this church of Santa Maria. And the members of Indio's gang are treated as the disciples. As they all see the light, you get a series of close-ups of them and organ music on the soundtrack. It's a kind of carnival approach to religion, where, yes, you recognize all the icons, you recognize all the symbols, and given the fact that this is at this stage primarily pitched at Italian and Mediterranean audiences, you could assume the audience would pick up the references. But then you gently mock it in this way, in order to show that those sort of moral values don't exist in this kind of society, that it's dog eat dog, it's the rule of violence by violence, of people who are totally at home in a world of violence. So he gets up into the pulpit. Once upon a time there was a carpenter. Well, that has clear reference to the New Testament, only he's telling them how to blow the safe in El Paso.
This one did well, because he was a builder of safes.
The church is still there in the mountains above Tabernas, but now it's been restored and is back in use as a church.
Wood cabinet. To get it made, the banker goes to our carpenter for the job. And one day, as destiny has it, the carpenter's in El Paso. He happens to walk into the bank there. And what does he find?
Extraordinary use of close-ups in this film. It's a Techniscope, which was the screen ratio they used. It was known as the poor man's CinemaScope, 2 frames for the price of 1. And they discovered quite early on, when making Fistful of Dollars, that it was particularly good at long shots and at very, very close-ups, where the top of the letterbox cuts off the top of the person's head and the bottom of the letterbox cuts off their chin, and then you can crank it in and get even closer to their eyes. So there's a lot of close-ups not used in the Hollywood way of reaction shot or master shot close-up to match it, but simply as portraits of all these fascinating gypsy faces of these actors playing the Mexican bad guys.
Because later, as a prisoner, he ran into me. The carpenter told me the story, and I tell you.
So as the parable continues from the pulpit, we see the reaction.
Almost $1 million in it.
Now, the safe with the candlesticks by the side of it, even that looks like an altar. And now we know that the safe is contained within that, although it's a drinks cabinet. The bank manager is played by Carlos Simi, the film's designer, in an in-joke and a thank you for designing El Paso for Leone, his only known film appearance.
This bank is secure enough to hold that much?
From the moment your money is on deposit here, Mr. Mortimer, you can sleep without any worries. Sarge?
The interiors were filmed either at Cinecittà Studios in Rome, or most of the interiors in El Paso were actually shot on location. So the saloon and the hotel with the view out of the window of the Almerian mountains were actually made in situ.
To try robbing us would be so futile that only a complete fool would attempt it.
Yeah. Or a complete madman.
One of the distinctive features of the Italian Western, of course, is the horses, where specialists note that they're really Andalusian high-kicking horses of a completely different kind to the Western horse, and very often the saddles are different as well. So you get, with the horses, a very different feeling to the traditional Western. Lee Van Cleef, having had his car accident in the late 1950s, had great difficulty getting on and off a horse and didn't want any frisky horses, so he was often given a circus horse to ride, which could be under his complete control. And you'll notice that Lee Van Cleef in a lot of Italian Westerns has a very high-stepping horse. That's because he's sitting on a circus horse. So Eastwood shed his poncho, and underneath, the trademark sheepskin waistcoat, blue shirt, shrunk-to-fit jeans, dusty hat, and designer stubble. The first major hero in film history to wear designer stubble. Usually they were clean-shaven. And in fact, a book came out about the Western in 1965, and it had photographs of all the great heroes of the Western, and there were beautifully lit photographs of Burt Lancaster, Gary Cooper, Rock Hudson, Robert Mitchum, and then suddenly a picture of this man with this stubble, with sunburn, with a scarred face, and you realise you're entering the world of the Italian Western, which has a completely different notion of what the physiognomy should be like. A lot of it based upon research into archive photos of the Wild West, and actually how people did look fairly beaten up, and not the well-scrubbed, overlit, matinee idol photos that you usually get of Western characters. Another very smoky saloon, this time in El Paso, shot on location in Almeria, with the street in the background. And instead of the deserted streets of Fistful of Dollars, the bar is crowded, the street is crowded. They can afford lots of extras. There's a feeling of texture in the background all the time. And Eastwood striking his match on any available surface. Van Cleef, of course, strikes his match on Klaus Kinski's braces, which doesn't go down too well, and leads to another face-off. A twang of the Maranzano, the Jew's harp, on the soundtrack, which signals a kind of punctuation. There's a gag coming. Also a tuba. Very often these kind of burping noises of the tuba signal there's some low comedy about to happen, of an almost Shakespearean kind. Dow. For some reason, Kinski is being encouraged not to go for his gun. Indio's gang doesn't want to make a scene. The two bounty hunters are beginning to notice that, for some reason, Indio doesn't want to draw attention to himself. So why is that? What's extraordinary about Lee Van Cleef's performance is that, having been almost a walk-on for about 10 or 15 years in Hollywood, always playing the bad guy, never really getting a chance to have a vocal part, such confidence in his performance as Colonel Mortimer, the sight gags, the slight irony, he's almost watching himself being the bounty hunter. And it's as if he'd played this part all his life, but actually it was the first large part he'd ever had, because Leone remembered his shape and his face. Leone actually had gone to America to cast him. Only for the second time he'd been to America in his life. The first time was to ensure that Clint Eastwood appeared in this second Dollars film and to actually sign and seal the deal. But the second time he went was to cast Lee Van Cleef. Leone had just been let down by Lee Marvin, who was originally slotted for the role of Colonel Mortimer, and Marvin had been scooped up for Cat Ballou, where he played two parts in a comedy western. So Leone was in trouble with only a week to go before shooting, and he went over to America armed with an aged casting directory with a photograph of Lee Van Cleef as he looked in High Noon as a very young man. And he searched around, he found him, met him at a motel in the outskirts of Los Angeles, with a suitcase full of dollars, and actually saw Lee Van Cleef in the distance walking towards him in a long raincoat, and turned to his production manager and said, "I don't even want to talk to him. I don't want to do an audition. Please don't try and dissuade me. The way that guy walks, the way he looks, I must cast him as Colonel Mortimer. Give him some of the money in the suitcase, get him to sign the contract, and I want him over in Rome tomorrow morning," which is exactly what happened. And as Lee Van Cleef said, when that suitcase was offered to him in the car park of a motel in the suburbs of Los Angeles, he couldn't even pay his electricity bill. So this was the turning point. And Van Cleef then went on to make several more films in Italy in the 1960s, where he became a superstar. He, in fact, made 12 westerns in the next 9 years in Italy and Spain, and became a major star in Europe. Mark Twain once said that in America, you're famous for your latest work. In Europe, you're famous for your greatest work. And the thing with Van Cleef was that they remembered him from all those westerns of the 1950s, when most people wouldn't even notice. But Leone remembered the bad guy in High Noon, the bad guy in Gunfight at the OK Corral, the bad guy in Liberty Valance, The Bravados, all these films. And he wanted him. And so he gave him his great opportunity. Again, in discussions with the composer Morricone, they said that ideally they'd like very much to write the score before the film was shot, and in fact cut the film and shoot the film to the music, like one long rock video. But time wasn't on their side. They had to get the movie done quickly. So Morricone was involved from the word go in the gestation of the production this time, whereas with Fistful of Dollars he'd been brought in after the film was shot, but they didn't have time to write the music in advance. Leone would go and see Morricone. They'd been to primary school together, so they'd known each other for a long time, and would describe the story, wouldn't give him the script, would describe the story and act out all the characters. And for this one, he said, I want a particular musical notation for each of the characters. A little trill on the flute for Clint Eastwood, a twang for Colonel Mortimer, and a chord on a Spanish guitar for El Indio. So like in a Wagnerian opera, you know the character is there by this musical signature on the soundtrack. Leone also, when he was in America on the trip to secure Clint Eastwood's services, did some research with Luciano Vincenzoni, the scriptwriter, in the Library of Congress at Wild West newspapers in order to get some of the texture of the period. So that reference to looking at the newspaper in El Paso is a kind of reference to the researches they did. He wanted to get the surface details right because, as in all the best fairy tales, you only really believe them when the details are right. When they're overlit and too sunny and too unbelievable, you don't believe anything. So this is part of his strategy. The old prophet is played by Josef Egger, who played Piripiro, the coffin maker in Fistful of Dollars. 76 years old, Austrian music hall comedian, and this was his very last film. He died shortly afterwards. This sequence was in fact added at a late stage by the scriptwriter Sergio Donati, adding to Luciano Vincenzoni's script because they felt they needed a piece of comedy at this point. The kind of part that in a traditional Western, Walter Brennan or Arthur Honeycutt would have played. You know, the sidekick with the beard, the Gabby Hayes kind of part, the old grizzled prospector, the old timer in the West. And this is the old prophet prophesying what's going to happen. And we discover in a sort of sight gag that the old prophet's hut is so near the railway line that every time the train goes past, this happens. A piece of kind of low, vulgar comedy to counterpose with the plotting of the raid on the bank in El Paso. A little bit like Shakespeare would have after the murder scene in Macbeth, the scene with the porter, where there's lots of low comedy, lots of swearing, lots of music hall, to take your mind off these rather nasty things that have just happened, and then catch you unawares because something's going to happen subsequently, which will jerk you onto the edge of your seat. That's the function of the old prophet in this film.
Rattle on about trains. I wanted to find out about this man. It's obvious you don't know anything.
No need to be insulting.
Eastwood is much more ironic, has much more of a twinkle in his eye in this film than he had in Fistful of Dollars, where he played the straight guy, the samurai, a straight down the line warrior. But in this one, there are lots of double takes and twinkles in his eye, which show that the light, semi-comedic Eastwood style is beginning to emerge. It's the most mature of the Leone performances so far. Getting into the swing of this. We can't take this too seriously. Yes, there's lots of heavy violence and brutality. Yes, there's a Western story going on, but at some level, it's a bit of a joke.
Man you asked about. There's only one question. How does he carry his gun, huh? He wears it here, across his belly?
Yeah.
Well, why didn't you tell me that in the first place, my boy? Of course I know the man you're trying to find out about. Of course I know him. He's Colonel Douglas Mortimer. Mortimer, a brave man, a soldier.
He was known as the best shot in the Carolinas. A great soldier. Now he's reduced to being a bounty killer, same as you. Because of trains. Because of the damn trains, damn 'em! Whew!
And now, for the first time, the two bounty hunters will meet. And this was the scene with which Leone persuaded Luciano Vincenzoni to write the script. He said, I want these two bounty hunters to meet in the street, and I want one of them to dust up the other's boot, and he'll get cross and dust up the other guy's boot, and then the thing will escalate, like a Laurel and Hardy sketch, until they almost shoot each other, like two children facing up to each other in the streets of Trastevere, where Leone grew up in the 1930s. So what we're about to have is a scene of a childlike scene of these two grown men trying to best each other. At last, the two bounty hunters can meet. Will it be a violent confrontation, or will it be a comedic one? And here are the children who watch it. It's like Cowboys and Indians. It's like the games we play. They're going to watch this spectacle, and a wonderful shot through Clint Eastwood's legs there, a very extreme kind of piece of almost parody Western shooting. Eastwood's waiting for Van Cleef in the street. The flute. Boom, bum, 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 bum. Twang for the Colonel.
Take it to the station. The gentleman's leaving.
A rather cruel piece of comedy at the expense of the Chinese-American porter, who doesn't know what the hell to do because he's being told by both men to do different things.
Take it back.
Take it to the station.
Go inside.
The station.
And if the El Indio duel in the church was for real and was filmed as a rhetorical duel that ended up in a moment of violence, this is a parody version of the face-off, of the linear confrontation of Hollywood westerns where they stand in the street facing each other. So they size each other up as professionals. How does he look? How does he dress? What's his personal style? What's his charisma? It's an incredibly macho approach, like two bullfighters circling around each other in the middle of the corridor. So let's damage his boots a bit to irritate him. Very, very slowly. Again, the tempo of it is most unlike a traditional Hollywood Western, where this very, very slow build-up, suddenly real time stops, and you stretch time in order to get maximum fun, just like the games we know, to get as much fun out of this confrontation between two grown-up children. And when Luciano Vincenzoni had this explained to him, he said, yeah, when I was growing up in Venice, I remember confrontations like that in street gangs. And when Leone was growing up in Trastevere, in the suburb of Rome, I remember confrontations like that in the 1930s. So we can identify with this. It's part of Italy just as it's part of the Wild West. But I don't think in Hollywood Westerns there'd ever been a moment where John Wayne and Robert Mitchum, John Wayne and Dean Martin had actually had a confrontation that was quite as childishly macho as this one, but that's exactly what they're having. Basically, one of them's got to get out of town so that the gang can be left to the other bounty hunter and they can take the reward.
Peking dog. A trick, maybe.
Low-angle shots of boots, close-ups of faces, a kind of cinematic rhetoric. Yes, the grammar of the Western was invented by Hollywood, and Leone grew up in the 40s and 50s watching those movies and absolutely loved them. He felt the Western had gone off the rails since the 1950s, but nevertheless he knew every shot in those classic Hollywood films. So he's taking those shots, but stretching them and making them into something else, a piece of pure style, which is what we're watching. The distinctive sound of the gunshot. Leone liked loud gunshots, so had them recorded in this quarry near Rome, where you got the echo effect. And as someone said, you know, the gun sounded like a cannon. He was very interested in sound design, and so was Ennio Morricone, a very carefully constructed soundtrack for its period, which would come into its own in the film Once Upon a Time in the West in 1968, where the sound design is incredibly intricate and the interplay of natural sounds and music. But music would be out of place here. Whistling sound as the hat hits the deck. The Colonel is a very good shot. He's also very cautious.
How can somebody in my business go around with a contraption like this?
So the hats end up together, and the two bounty hunters swap notes about their profession. In 1950s Hollywood, movies about bounty hunters, and there weren't that many of them, tended to treat bounty hunting as a problem. In The Naked Spur and The Tin Star by Anthony Mann, the bounty hunters are twisted, rather corrupted people who have to get something out of their system in order to grow out of bounty hunting, settle down, get a wife, settle in the Western town, and become a conventional hero, a conventional human being. The same in The Bounty Hunter, directed by Andre de Toth with Randolph Scott, where again, he's a bounty hunter, but he has an excuse for it. It isn't a good way to earn a living. It's something that has to be morally judged. But in this movie, the bounty hunters are simply a way of earning a living. Two professionals comparing notes, and the only forces of law and order in the entire territory. So morally, there's been a complete leap in the attitude towards bounty hunting. The bounty hunter, because he works for cash, because he doesn't say a man's got to do what a man's got to do, he isn't about honor, he isn't about morality, he's about working for cash. Actually, it turns out that the Colonel does have a moral reason for what he's doing, but we don't discover that till the last reel. But here's the climax of the relationship between the young man, the boy, and the old colonel, the cautious colonel, the man who waits till he's out of pistol range, brings out his buntline special, and shoots his prey. A cautious man, whereas Clint Eastwood is a bit reckless.
When two hunters go after the same prey, they usually end up shooting each other in the back, and we don't want to shoot each other in the back.
But we usually end up shooting each other in the back. It's a difficult thing to do if you think about it. Both of them shooting each other in the back. Slight mistranslation there.
All right. I'll be generous. You can have the reward for Indio. And I'll take the reward for the rest of the band.
No. All wrong. No, Indio's worth 10,000.
Lee Van Cleef's appearance and costume, and even his pipe, would become as much a trademark for him as the poncho, the waistcoat, and the cheroot, the Toscano, were for Clint Eastwood. And in most of the 12 westerns that Lee Van Cleef subsequently made in Italy and Spain, he'd be dressed in exactly the same way. Sabata, the Avenger, where he wears the cape, the black hat, and the pipe. He's the kind of mature hero. Actually, Leone thought he was a lot older than he was. He assumed that Van Cleef was well into his 50s by this stage, but actually he was only 40 and had to be aged for the part of the mature colonel.
The partnership. With no tricks, of course.
No tricks.
When Leone first met Van Cleef, he said, "You look exactly like Van Gogh, and that's exactly what I want."
You realize, of course, we're going to have to figure out some way to get them in the middle.
Yep. One from the outside, one from the inside. There's no other way. One of us will have to join Indio's band.
Again, that light, ironic repartee Eastwood, the light throwaway Eastwood starts here. In the first film, he was much heavier. In fact, Eastwood was dubbed in Italy by an actor called Enrico Maria Salerno, who had a much, much deeper voice than Clint Eastwood. And so if you see Italian versions of these films, the hero is much heavier, much more sort of bass-voiced, much more of a kind of a bad guy in his voice, whereas Eastwood's light Californian accent and those throwaway intonations really come through now. Some people, when writing about Clint Eastwood, have said that it was at this stage in his career that he realized that the breathy delivery of lines by Marilyn Monroe was sexy and could be emulated by a male as well. So that breathy Marilyn Monroe style of delivering lines may also have been an influence. But mainly, it's the arrival of a sense of humor, the confidence to have a sense of humor, cut loose from other source materials. Fistful of Dollars had been based directly on Kurosawa's film Yojimbo. This is an original screenplay. And they have a budget of 600,000. They have a producer, Alberto Grimaldi, the Neapolitan lawyer, who was the producer on this film, who was absolutely backing Leone. And there's a sense of confidence about everything in the film, that Leone is beginning to breathe. And some people reckon that For a Few Dollars More is the archetypal Leone movie, the archetypal Italian Western, the one that's worth all the others put together. A cut now from The Pocket Watch and Mortimer to the first flashback in the film, the first of three, where Indio's smoking a joint of marijuana, and you get this whirring sound on the soundtrack, and Indio is looking through a window, a rain-sodden window, at a young couple inside the room. We have no idea what this means. It's something that must have happened in El Indio's past. And Leone's use of the flashback is really interesting in this film, as indeed it is in Once Upon a Time in the West. It's not a narrative thing. It's not like what happened in the past. It's a memory. It's Freudian. It's someone dredging into their unconscious and remembering something that happened in their past. Leone and the assistant director, Tonino Valeri, slightly overestimated the impact of marijuana on someone's mind. They thought that the whirring noise and the fact the screen goes all red and there's a kind of manic quality to Indio's behavior when he's under the influence of the drug, that this was the kind of thing that marijuana did to you. After all anyone knew about marijuana at this stage was what they'd learned from horror movies like Reefer Madness. But nevertheless, despite that, this was adding to the litany of bad attributes of Indio. He goes into the room, he shoots the young man. The young man is played by a German actor called Karl Harenbach, who subsequently changed his name to Peter Lee Lawrence, in reference to Lee Van Cleef, and became a famous spaghetti western star after this film. The young girl was played by Rosemary Dexter. Now, who are they? What's this got to do with the chiming watch? What's it got to do with Lee Van Cleef? What's it got to do with Indio? The solution to those questions is the hinge of the entire story. But this being a Leone film, we won't find out about it till the very last minute. And here's an interesting sight gag. We're in Alamogordo at the jail. Alamogordo, Los Alamos. What happened at Los Alamos? It was the site of the first nuclear explosion. So what's going to happen here? Well, there's going to be a bit of an explosion as Clint Eastwood appears at the window smoking, and Sancho Perez is in the jail, and we get some dynamite attached to the bars of the jail. We're going to have a mini Los Alamos explosion. It's the kind of gag that Italian scriptwriters loved. Main title theme, reprise, with Alessandrone and his choir and his whistling and the insistent drum beat for an action sequence. But again, not a lush symphonic Dmitri Tiomkin or Jerome Moros type soundtrack, but a stripped-down Mediterranean-sounding soundtrack with these folk instruments and the whistling. Morricone said that he used the whistling because it reminded him of the isolation of the cowboy out in the wilderness. It's the sort of thing you do when you're by yourself, is to whistle, so that was the reference to the whistling.
Who is that with you?
He got me out. And a friend of mine.
Why did he help you? Did you ask him that?
Yeah. Amigo, why did you help me out?
It's a little bit late for Sancho Perez to ask that, but it's suddenly the penny's dropped that the man who got him out of jail is someone he's never met before. Eastwood isn't wearing his leather gun hand gauntlet in these scenes where he visits Indio's gang, and it seems that there's something which isn't quite resolved in the script about this leather gauntlet is his trademark, that everyone knows Manco by his gauntlet, by the one hand that he uses for his gun. So in order not to give himself away, he doesn't wear it when he visits India, and subsequently he will show it to someone, which will reveal who he really is. But this aspect of it is very obscure and isn't resolved. Electronic whir as Indio lights up another joint.
Amigo.
It's difficult to imagine in 1965 quite how radical this was, and Leone's rationale for it was that in some, what were then known as third world developing countries, Bolivia, Mexico, marijuana was a common way of taking one's mind off the cost of living, he felt. And so a Mexican bad guy might well smoke marijuana, but this was a very radical thing to add to his many attributes.
Chico, Paco, and you, amigo, will rob the bank in Santa Cruz. Shoot, kill, get every gun in the area after you, especially those from El Paso. Any others around, we'll take care of them. And then after the job, we'll all meet again at Las Palmeras.
So we're in the church, we've seen El Paso, we've seen Tucumcari, we've seen White Rocks, and now we're going to see Santa Cruz as well. A whole series of Leone towns in this film.
I gotta get my rest.
I've got to get my rest. And at this point, in the Italian version, there would have been an intermission. And even today, very often, if you go to the cinema in southern Italy, you get an intermission, usually at a very arbitrary point in the film, for everyone to stretch their legs, have an ice cream, have a smoke, clear the hall, and then we all come back in again. But here was an official intermission where the film stops and starts again. Eastwood remembers the man who shot his cigar.
Who said I was joking?
I don't get that. If it's true.
Too bad you have to die.
What is...
He's wearing his leather gauntlet again. There's going to be some violence. Electronic trill and close-ups of these wonderful physiognomies. The gypsies of Andalusia in southern Spain were queuing up to get bit parts in these films. I once met one of the casting directors in Almeria called Luis Beltran, and he told me that people would come from far and wide when they heard there was a Leone production about to be made, and their faces would be auditioned for those close-ups. It didn't matter too much about their acting ability. After all, the dialogue track was put on afterwards. What mattered was what they looked like. And there would be knife fights in the auditions. And Beltran took off his shirt and showed me this scar right across his stomach should be given him by someone who didn't get the part of one of the Mexican baddies.
By now, they should be at Santa Cruz.
So Indio's gang rides from the church to go to El Paso, while Eastwood rides to Santa Cruz. And in Santa Cruz, an extraordinary gag, there's chickens all over the street. In fact, Santa Cruz, this town was shot at Cinecittà, which was a standing Western set at Cinecittà Studios in Rome. But there's chickens all over the main street. And when Eastwood goes into the telegraph office, there's lots of eggs as well. So this is a chicken town, another sight gag from Sergio Leone. And he doesn't want to really engage in violence and rob the bank in Santa Cruz. He wants to persuade the telegraph man to pretend that the bank has been robbed in Santa Cruz. So he's got a heart after all, the man with no name. He doesn't want to engage in needless violence.
Sure would have. You might hear one. The alarm.
One of the reasons why the budget was much larger on Dollars More was not only because Fistful of Dollars had been very, very successful when it was released the previous Christmas, but this was a three-way co-production between PEA Productions of Rome, which was the production company of Alberto Grimaldi, Arturo Gonzalez of Madrid, and Constantin Film, a major production house in Munich, Germany. And it's interesting, the distribution of interest in the cast, that obviously the two leads are American, and there's a lot of Spanish actors in this film, and Italian actors. There's Spanish actors particularly in the smaller parts, and Italian actors as Indio's gang. But the West German actors are very thin on the ground. There's Klaus Kinski playing one member of the gang, and he's a very memorable performer, but doesn't appear very often, and the hotelier's wife, and that's about it for the West German interest. So clearly Constantin thought, yeah, after the success of Fistful, this was worth investing in, even though there was no one in effect for West German audiences to root for, whereas in Fistful of Dollars there were a lot of German actors. At this time, German westerns made in West Germany with locations shot at Split on the Adriatic in Yugoslavia were very, very popular as well, based on the writings of the late 19th century German author Karl May, a series of films with titles like Winnetou the Warrior and The Treasure of Silver Lake. So the European Western is really catching fire now in 1965. West Germans are watching German Westerns, Italians and Spanish are watching Italian and Spanish Westerns, but none of them have been exported yet. Because of the problem over the copyright of Kurosawa's film Yojimbo, the release of Fistful of Dollars was held up in the United States till 1967. And when it was released back to back with For a Few Dollars More and The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. One of them opened in January, one of them in the spring, one of them a couple of months later. So you got a triple whammy of Clint Eastwood Dollars films all arriving at the same time in 1967 in the United States. But it took 2 years for the issue to be cleared legally so that United Artists would pick up on these films and release them in the United States. So these films were really intended for a European audience, for a Southern Italian audience, for a West German audience, for a Spanish audience, for a Far Eastern audience, and that audience would sustain the kind of budget that was given to this film. The action music of Morricone with the insistent drums again. It was after hearing this soundtrack For a Few Dollars More that the Italian director Gillo Pontecorvo decided to employ Ennio Morricone as the composer of his film The Battle of Algiers, a classic political movie about the French in Algeria in the 1950s. And Morricone did the score for that, and it was because of the effectiveness of this score, one of Morricone's best, that he was chosen by Pontecorvo. Of course, whereas Morricone had only done 1 or 2 westerns before Fistful of Dollars, by the time of For a Few Dollars More, he'd scored 7 or 8 movies in between scoring Fistful of Dollars and For a Few Dollars More. He was now a very well-known composer of film scores in Italy, extremely prolific. So again, he was growing in confidence as a film composer with a very recognizable style. It's interesting that he worked so well with Leone. They were really in sync with one another. Leone wasn't very good at humming, and in fact was almost tone deaf, although he had a very, very strong and sensitive sense of sound in general. But somehow they were in sync. They understood each other, and Morricone's best scores come out of the collaboration with Leone. Rather like Bernard Herrmann and Alfred Hitchcock, or Nino Rota, the composer, with Federico Fellini. This was a wonderful relationship that brought out the best in both of them, Leone and Morricone. The interplay of music and image is most unusual. The Bank of El Paso, a Spanish fortress with part of it having tumbled down on the left, was deliberately designed by Carlo Simi in this style. He didn't want the traditional wood-clad bank that you get in the main street of Hollywood westerns. He wanted a Hispanic bank, and the idea of an old fortress also adds to the charisma of the building, the kind of touch that Carlo Simi, the designer, became famous for. Everything heightened a bit, everything a bit larger than life. Lots and lots of reference books were poured over for the design of the Wild West, but then an Italian style was superimposed on that. So it's kind of designer Wild West that Carlo Simi was producing. One of the underrated aspects of these films is, I think, the production design. It's almost as distinctive as the music and the direction. By now, Carlo Simi himself was designing several Italian westerns. See, by now, 1965, the gold rush had begun. Fistful of Dollars had been hugely successful, and 20 to 25 westerns were in the pipeline at the time that For a Few Dollars More was being made. So there's a kind of inflationary pressure within the Italian film industry. Simi had designed 1 or 2 westerns, and Leone wanted to put distance between himself and those assembly line movies that were all being ripped off from Fistful of Dollars, films with titles like They Call Me or My Name Is, about bounty hunters riding into town, setting one faction against the other. There were countless Fistful of Dollars derivatives. So he wanted to move on, but there was also that creative pressure from within the industry. And one of Leone's favourite stories, after dinner stories at this time, was of a production, a very cheap Italian Western that was made in the wake of Fistful of Dollars. And the producers hadn't really got much money, so they raised the money weekly on the basis of the rushes or dailies of what they'd shot. So after the first week, they showed the dailies to the money men, and they said, fine, we'll pay for the second week. But they got towards the end of the movie, and the money ran out. So the lead actor, who was a minor actor from America, walked off the set, which left them with a problem because the final scene of the film was the hero riding into a Native American encampment on a buggy and saying to the chief, is it to be the words of peace or is it to be the words of war? You know, the classic ending to a cowboy and Indian movie. So they said to the director, what are we going to do? We haven't got a lead actor and we've still got this last scene to shoot. Oh, let me think about it, said the director. And the director came back 5 minutes later. He said, you know the man who cleans the floor in the studios? That old man. He's got a great face. Let's put him on the buggy and what'll happen is he'll ride up to the Indian encampment on the buggy and he'll say, my son couldn't come, so they sent me instead. That was the world of the Italian Western in 1964-5, the gold rush built on sand that was spewing out derivatives of Fistful of Dollars. And that's the context that one must remember that this film was made in. When they shot in Almeria, there were 3 or 4 other productions just beside them with people riding around pretending to be cowboys at exactly the same time. And Almeria began to become a fantastically successful location for the Spanish. Tabernas actually had, the little village of Tabernas, where El Paso was built, actually had a street called Cinema Street, which had several cinemas on it. So the locations would be used. The film would be sent to Madrid for processing, or perhaps to Rome for processing. Then the rushes would come back, usually in black and white, so they were quite difficult to actually to see how good they were. And suddenly Almeria became a very, very fashionable place to shoot. Unfortunately, infrastructure was never put in. They never built any labs. They never built any sound stages at Almeria. So it was pure location, with location, technicians, craftspeople, stunt people, and that was it. Some people reckoned that Francisco Franco, who was ruling Spain at the time, was punishing Almeria because it was one of the last regions to hold out against him on the Republican side in the Spanish Civil War. So he didn't invest in infrastructure in Almeria. And instead, when the location ceased to be fashionable in the 1970s, so it all moved away, like a ghost town. So Almeria was left with all these standing sets like El Paso, which became tourist attractions, and people didn't use Spain nearly so much as they had before. It was a very sad decline. So you now wonder why in this little village tucked away in Andalusia, a village called Tabernas, why do they have somewhere called Cinema Street? You know, it's like a piece of archaeology. You can't tell what that boom must have been like in the mid-1960s. But boom it was. And it was, in fact, David Lean's film, Lawrence of Arabia, of 3 years before, that really started making Almeria such a fashionable location. Much of Lawrence was filmed in North Africa and Wadi Rum and so on. But they moved ultimately to Almeria for the scenes set in Aqaba and various scenes in the desert. And this made people take notice of the hills, the mountains, the dried up riverbeds, the desert, the olive trees, the colours of Almeria as a distinctive location. And hundreds of movies were made there in the 1960s. Biblical epics, medieval films, lots and lots of westerns, and even contemporary films. It became a very distinctive location. It was Europe's Arizona. Leone learned his trade in the 1950s, working with a lot of American crews in Rome on various large-budget productions. Quo Vadis, notably the chariot race in Ben-Hur, and he learned a lot about how to direct action sequences from Hollywood professionals like Robert Wise and William Wyler and other directors who made epics at this time. And so this idea of undercranking the camera so the horses move a little bit faster than they do in real life, and that sense of hyperactivity in the action sequences were very much picked up from second unit work on big Hollywood productions in Rome in the 1960s. And uncharitable people say that a lot of the spaghetti western directors learned their trade on second units, which is why they were so terrible at dialogue. They were great at filming horses, great at big action sequences with soaring choirs and insistent drums and big Almerian scenes. They weren't so hot when people opened their mouths. I think that's unfair, but you can see why they say it when you see the power of an action sequence like this. This crossroads up in the hills of Almeria is above Tabernas, where 2 ramblas, dried up riverbeds, meet.
Oh, I'm not running away. I'm going after him. I'm going alone. Our partnership is dissolved.
Now, boy, let's wait and talk it over.
Yeah, well, all we've done is talk. I've been reasonable with no results.
Now, take it easy.
We only knew the Santa Cruz part of his plan. Well, you were the one who had their strategy all worked out. Now I'm gonna meet Indio.
I see. I better go along.
I'm going alone, me. I have an appointment with Indio, and I'm not gonna let anyone else interfere.
You're certain about that?
That's right, Colonel.
An oboe theme in the background, which is really the shape of things to come for Ennio Morricone. That there's another Morricone that's emerging as a movie composer. The more symphonic, lush, well-mannered, less vulgar Morricone, and the Colonel's theme, which is taken up as an oboe theme and becomes more and more symphonic and orchestral as the movie progresses until the final sequences, is the kind of score for which Morricone would become famous post-Leone, a more baroque orchestral approach to scoring a movie, and it begins with this rather lyrical use of the Colonel's theme.
Good spot for an ambush, and we can get him between two fires.
Yeah, you on the outside, me on the inside, right?
Mm-hmm. North?
North.
This sequence was filmed at a part of the Almerian desert near Tabernas called l'Oasis, the Oasis. And the distinctive feature of it is that it's surrounded by palm trees, which is very odd in the ecology of southern Spain. And the reason it's surrounded by palm trees is because the props people planted the palm trees during the making of Lawrence of Arabia 3 years earlier, and they seeded themselves and started growing. So there's a whole piece of Almeria which looks like Morocco, and it's all due to the props people of Lawrence of Arabia. And it became somewhere to shoot. If you want something to look like North Africa or palm tree land, go to l'Oasis in Almeria, and you've got a built-in set. It's extraordinary that those palm trees should have survived.
And the others, dead?
Yeah. After Santa Cruz, we headed for El Paso, and they hit us from all sides.
Amplified sound again, a very extreme comic strip punch, which always sounds as it could push someone into the next door mountain, which you get when people slap each other in Italian westerns. It's because the soundtrack is laid on afterwards, where you can do the sound design after the movie has finished and simply sit in the dubbing room and decide how many layers of sound you want to put on. Leone once said that sound was 40% of a movie. It might even be more than that.
North.
North? Along Rio Bravo Canyon?
Why not?
Seems like a good place for an ambush to me.
You know a better way to go?
Yeah, south.
Right to the border?
Yeah, they'll never expect you to cross the border now that the alarm's been sent.
No. Think we'll head east. There's a place I know about. Agua Caliente.
Agua Caliente, hot water in Spanish. And Agua Caliente was filmed at a village called Los Albaricoques, called the Apricots, which was a village they discovered when shooting the opening sequences of Fistful of Dollars. Cobbled streets, single-story houses, adobe houses, a beautiful Almerian village, southern Spain style. And behind some of the farms, a cobbled threshing yard where the grain would be threshed. And one of those cobbled yards was used by Leone as the site of the final duel, the arena in which the final duel takes place, as if it's the Colosseum in the middle of Rome, this circular cobbled threshing ground, which is very much a distinctive feature of the agriculture of southern Spain.
Going to town alone, amigo.
So now we're in a real village. This isn't a set. This is exactly as it is, and it's like this today as well. I've visited it many times. There's a very satisfying scrunch as you walk down the main street on the cobbles, even if you're not wearing Clint Eastwood's boots. Fans of Fistful of Dollars will recognize the shot as almost identical to one of the opening shots as he goes into San Miguel at the beginning of Fistful of Dollars, Los Albaricoques. And just down the road from here is a disused convent stroke monastery, which was used for one or two of the nighttime sequences for a few dollars more, but came into its own as the location of Padre Ramirez's cell, the hospital in the American Civil War, in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So they're using found bits of rural Spain in order to depict 19th century Mexico. Now, is Eastwood going to shoot these people coming out of their houses simply to show off to Indio that he's a hard man and that he's prepared to earn the respect of the gang? Or is he, like in Santa Cruz, going to find a way around the violence so he doesn't have to kill people needlessly? Unlike Indio, who kills everybody. So, typical triangular moment. The three people come out, and already we expect in a Leone film that this is going to turn into one of those face-offs. 3 against 1, a trinity of people standing at one end of the street and the good guy at the other. This is the setup for a Leone duel. Eastwood walks towards them. There should be thunderous music, there should be trumpet music, there should be a degallo, a Mexican cutthroat song, a funeral dirge, but it's silent. It isn't going to happen. This isn't going to turn into a Leone duel. They're retreating. And in this face-off, they're not going to win. Again, a musical trill, punctuation. This is a gag. We're not supposed to take this too seriously. And Eastwood notices this little boy trying to get apples off the tree. So instead of shooting the 3 Mexican heavies, he shoots the apples off the tree to help the child. For one nasty moment, we think, is he going to shoot the child? It is possible in a Leone film that that might happen, and Indio has already shot a child earlier, but not on this occasion.
Bravo.
Bravo. Eastwood has respect for the Lee Van Cleef character. And in fact, the Lee Van Cleef character in this film is very often one step ahead of the Clint Eastwood character. He's thoughtful, he's rational, he plans things in advance, he has a very professional attitude to his job, whereas the Eastwood character rushes into things. And very often in this film, the Lee Van Cleef character is one step ahead. And he's one step ahead here. He's worked out that Eastwood's going to go to Agua Caliente when he was actually told to go to somewhere completely different. Because in a very paranoid way, he's worked out that Eastwood would do the opposite of what he was told, and so they're all going to end up in Agua Caliente. Mortimer is a clever man.
You mind telling me how you got here?
I just reasoned it out. I figured you'd tell Indio to do just exactly the opposite of what we agreed. And he's suspicious enough to figure out something else. Since El Paso was out of the question, well, here I am.
That is the most paranoid piece of logic you can imagine in a film. He's just working out what everyone wouldn't have done in order by a process of deduction to work out what they have ended up doing. But now, the Klaus Kinski character, Wild, the Wild One, is meeting Van Cleef again. Noise on tuba. Let's continue the gag that began much earlier on in the film, when they first went into El Paso. There's unresolved business between them. And this sequence, when it was run on the moviola for the composer Ennio Morricone, Leone always recalled, reduced Morricone to fits of laughter. He couldn't actually watch it without corpsing from laughter, and he just thought it was so funny, this confrontation between this lunatic Klaus Kinski character, the hunchback, and the cool Lee Van Cleef. It's a mad form of macho between them, and it's a low form of comedy.
Come on, you light another match.
I generally smoke just after I eat. Why don't you come back in about 10 minutes?
10 minutes, you'll be smoking in hell. Get out!
Stay calm.
On your feet. What you doing? Count to 3.
One. 2.
And Colonel Mortimer produces a derringer, hidden derringer from up his sleeve, just as Lee Van Cleef did in Gunfight at the OK Corral, just as the chiming watch appears on the soundtrack, as the pocket watch came from Henry King's film The Bravados, and the arena for the final duel, which they're about to enter, comes from the Bud Bettiker film Ride Lonesome, where Lee Van Cleef played the baddie as well. So a whole series of references here to Lee Van Cleef's earlier career as a Hollywood star. Colonel Mortimer isn't just a character in the movie, he's the sum total of all Lee Van Cleef's appearances, remembered by a movie buff, and reworked and transformed for his audience.
What safe, senor?
The one from El Paso you got there ahead of me. However, open that safe and you're going to destroy half the banknotes.
And the link between Indio and Mortimer is the chiming watch again on the soundtrack. This is what they've got in common. We don't quite know why. We've seen one flashback, which partly explains. But what's the connection with the Lee Van Cleef character? The music is telling us there is one.
5,000.
2, I'll pay you.
5.
And again, Colonel Mortimer, the professional. He's not going to blow up the safe with dynamite. He's not going to have a shoot-'em-up approach to this. He's got acid. He's got his tools. He's got the craftsman's kit for opening this safe, just as he's got the craftsman's kit of guns in his saddlecloth, which he opened earlier in the film. This man goes around with all the tools he needs to get through life. A cautious bounty hunter who comes well prepared. There's no need to blow all the money to Kingdom Come, as they would do subsequently in films like Butch Cassidy. You just take this rationally. The scene between Van Cleef and Klaus Kinski, which has gone into the history books as one of the classic scenes in the Italian Western, is a good example of Leone's carnival sense of comedy. We've seen the hotel keepers, the small officials, the Chinese-American porter, the sheriffs, and the fun that's been had at their expense throughout the film. And ditto Wilde, although today, with our more sensitive views on disability, it doesn't seem quite so funny. But the idea of a carnival set of characters was very strong. That's where Leone's heart lay. He loved taking the hallowed moments of culture and doing a carnival thing with them. It's a little bit like the organ music in the earlier scene in The Duel, taking a piece of Bach, the Toccata and Fugue, and using it as the soundtrack for a duel. You take high culture, you take the highest of cultural artifacts, and you mock them gently in the film. Well, that's the use of the carnival. You're taking the Western, the classic Western, and bringing lots of carnival characters in to bring a kind of Mediterranean comedic flavour to it all. And subsequently in Leone's cinema, there was always one of these carnival characters, which was where the heart of the film lay. Eli Wallach, playing Tuco in The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, is a carnival. He eats, he swears, he belches, he's very extreme, he talks a lot, and he's the carnival. He's Sancho Panza to Clint Eastwood's Don Quixote. And the same with the Rod Steiger character in Duck-You-Sucker, Fistful of Dynamite, who is the Sancho Panza to James Coburn's Knight of the Woeful Countenance. So there's always this Mediterranean kind of carnival character in Leone's cinema, but for a few dollars more, the carnival character is split amongst various characters who represent caricatures, cartoons. It's as if Chuck Jones had made a movie about the Wild West. These are cartoon characters, and they're there to make sure that the violence and the main plot of Indio and his psychopathic behavior don't get too heavy for consumption. They lighten the palate. These evening shots were taken in the monastery down the road from Los Albaricoques, which subsequently became the hospital in The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. This monastery, in fact, has an important place in Spanish culture in the 20th century, because there's a play by Garcia Lorca called Blood Wedding, written in the 1930s, which is all about a couple who run away from their tyrannical parents and hide away in the Spanish countryside. And it has a terrible ending as the parents and the forces of law and order come to get them. It all ends in tears. Well, this was based on a real-life news story that took place in Andalusia, and the place where they hid in real life was in fact the monastery just outside Los Albaricoques. So culturally, that monastery meant a lot to Spanish audiences. It was really quite well known in Spanish culture. Somebody's come through the roof already. Somebody's beaten Eastwood to it. Had the same idea. under the cover of dark, looking for the gold. And it was, of course, Colonel Mortimer, who's one step ahead throughout this part of the film. He had the idea of taking the slates off the roof. He had the idea of breaking in to try and find where the gold from El Paso is.
It's all right here.
Subsequently, in the westerns that Lee Van Cleef made initially, he very often wore a toupee to make himself look much younger. But in these sequences, it's his real hair. He's thinning on top. He's a mature character, this ex-colonel from the American Civil War from Carolina, the mature sort of fatherly figure amongst the two bounty hunters. But subsequently, he'd play a more juvenile character and would wear an assortment of wigs, many of which didn't suit him at all. Lee Van Cleef reminisced subsequently about what it was like to work on the set of For a Few Dollars More. Leone spoke a little English, but not much, so he would stand there in his cowboy hat, in his glasses, saying, watch me, Clint, watch me, Lee, and act out their parts for them in a kind of Romanesque rhyme, turning them into kind of Roman characters. So that was Leone's contribution, and then the actors would speak Spanish, would speak Italian, would speak German. So Lee Van Cleef didn't know what on earth, but he said even one of the characters was a Cockney Englishman, and he couldn't understand him either. So apart from Clint Eastwood, he couldn't understand anyone on the set. There was an interpreter, which helped, but what he would do is he'd basically read the script, get a rough idea of what they were saying, and wait till their lips stopped moving, and then he'd intervene with his lines, which you'd think isn't the best form of doing a performance, but it seems to have worked pretty well. There's the leather gauntlet. Again, this symbolism of this character. Put it on so that he'll become Manco. This cluster of references to the gun hand, the support that the gun hand needs, Manco, the one-handed man, and all these things. And this is a Leone-esque scene indulging his penchant for brutality, rather like the scene with the setting fire to the Baxter house in For a Fistful of Dollars, where the bad guys sit and laugh while ultra-violence is perpetrated on the two characters. And this was pruned by the British censor when the film came out, even though the film had an X certificate. A lot of the moments of punching, I mean, the punishment these two characters get would kill them, would lay them out forever. But for some reason, Leone liked to have a scene where you'd have the baddies really enjoying the violence as if it's in an arena, as if it's in a bullfight. Particularly Indio, who can't stop laughing manically. In fact, Indio's character, having broken out of jail and planned this robbery in El Paso and had some sense of purpose, Indio's character begins to disintegrate at this part of the film. He becomes increasingly aimless. He begins to set the members of his gang against one another. He becomes self-destructive. He's leading them all towards mass destruction. There's a kind of psychosis about his behavior in this part of the film, which some of the other gang members begin to notice. All semblance of rationality is gone in Indio's behavior. There's no logic to what he's doing.
Cash that was in the bank. Right. And suppose he finds the bodies of these men just outside El Paso, with lots of money on them. What will the sheriff think?
Well,
That's right.
What you also get throughout the film, but particularly at this stage in the film, is the contrast between the two acting styles. The laid-back, laconic, understated acting style of the two Americans, where what isn't said is just as important as what is said, versus what Clint Eastwood called the Hell's-a-Poppin' school of acting, which is this flamboyant, external, rhetorical acting of the Mexican bad guys. And that contrast, and the contrast between the laid-back performance of Clint Eastwood and this gunshots and sounds of horses' hooves, is at the heart of the performances in the film. In fact, Leone once told me that he remembered Clint Eastwood sitting on the set in between takes like a cat, having a nap with his hat over his eyes, and then his moment would come to actually appear, put on his hat, step forward, do the performance like a cat, then just sit back and go back to sleep. And that was the kind of atmosphere surrounding the character, that what they're doing is looping Clint Eastwood's real character into the character of the man with no name as it develops. So a lot of the mannerisms are from Leone observing Clint Eastwood's performance on the set. He isn't acting the samurai part, which had been made famous by Toshiro Mifune this time. He's creating a character of his own.
What is it, Nino? Change our plans. Indio wants you.
Leone seems to have had a thing about circular spaces. Very often these moments of violence occur within arenas, and whereas the traditional Western is linear, main streets, canyons, people walking towards each other, in the Italian Western these confrontations occur in circles, like the punch-up we've just seen of the two bounty hunters, like the duel at the end of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and the duel that's going to come at the end of For a Few Dollars More. And Carlo Simi was asked by Leone to find circles for these things to happen in, find a cobbled threshing yard for the final duel, find a circular cemetery for the end of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And Simi said to me once, I don't understand what he had about circles. I don't even dare ask. It's probably Freudian, but he had a thing about circles. And these big settling of accounts scenes, these big duels where all the sort of destiny of the characters comes together in one ritual moment, had to take place in a circle. He absolutely insisted on that in all four of his westerns. It's a very distinctive feature. Another distinctive feature is the letterbox shape of the Techniscope frame. Director of photography Massimo Dallamano, and then after For a Few Dollars More, to be succeeded by Tonino Dellicoli, Leone's great director of photography. And it's a form of cinemascope where it's called 2P, two perforation cinemascope, where two frames of film are printed for the price of one. It's a sort of half-price version of cinemascope. It has limitations, and Techniscope wasn't actually much used in the United States, but it's very, very popular in Italy in the 1960s. Very strong on close-ups and also on long shots. But this idea of the letterbox image was very strong in Leone. The films weren't storyboarded. He never storyboarded his films, but he was famous for having all the setups in his head. He'd arrive on the set first thing in the morning and have a very, very clear idea. And the directors of photography, normally you shoot close-ups late in the evening because you've shot the master shots, you've shot the long shots during the sunshine, and you can use artificial light to some extent for the close-ups. But Leone said, no, let's shoot the close-ups at midday. They're just as important as the long shots. And the cameramen would get upset about this. They'd also get upset about the length of the working day. Leone was completely obsessive when on the set. So they'd start at the crack of dawn when sun rose over the Spanish desert and work through till 8 or 9 o'clock at night. He had this story in his head that he'd acted out to many, many people. He'd acted it out to Morricone, he'd acted it out to the actors, he'd acted it out to Luciano Vincenzoni, the scriptwriter, and he'd acted it out to Alberto Grimaldi, the producer. So he had this story in his head as a storyteller, and he knew exactly what he wanted from each day's work. But it meant he drove his crews very, very hard. This was the first of the big crews that Leone had worked with. It was a fairly small crew on Fistful of Dollars, and it actually got smaller towards the end when the money ran out, when some sequences were filmed with just 7 people. But this is a large, complex shoot. With many, many locations, many different sets, many different lighting setups. It was the most complicated movie that Leone had ever been involved in, and everyone commented on how he motivated everyone on the set. He was quite brilliant at getting them all marching behind him in the service of this story. He'd enthuse everyone and take ideas from all sorts of technicians as well as camera people as well as actors. So they'd all felt ownership of the finished result. It was a very, very happy set. And that's one of the things that they all remember, except Gian Maria Volonté, who got fed up with Leone trying to reduce the size of his performance. Volonté was a theatre actor and much, much larger than life, which worked well for the character of Indio, just as it had worked for the character of Ramon in Fistful of Dollars. But Leone thought he was a bit too big, so he kept trying to tire him out by having lots and lots of takes so that Volonté's performance would get smaller. And one day Volonté got upset and actually walked off the set, and someone shouted after him, well, if you expect a car to bring you back, you've got another thing coming. So he walked out into the desert, thumbed a lift somewhere, and eventually came back. They all apologized, and they continued with the shooting. So that's the only story I've heard from all the people I've spoken to about this shoot of any unsettled atmosphere on the set. On the whole, they remember this being a highly motivated movie. They all believed in what they were doing. Here's Indio emptying his gun into the dead body of one of his gang, which was a cardinal sin where the British censor was concerned. You could shoot people, they can fall over, but what you don't do is enjoy it and laugh, and what you don't do is empty a gun into a dead body. So this got the film into some trouble. Indio is getting seriously insane by this stage in the film, and Volonté's performance is getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
Just kill Slim. And he helped those two bounty killers get away. I want him back.
It's so strange. Indio let the bounty killers get away. He did it so that he could then blame someone, so he could then shoot them and decimate his own gang. This is a pure example of self-destruction. He's going round and round in circles, destroying his own people. He's lost the gold, he's lost the bounty hunters, and now he turns on his own people. There's a kind of fascistic element to this as he chases his own tail. But Groggy, played by Luigi Pistilli on the right, doesn't quite buy it. He kind of knows what's going on in Indio's mind. And the look on his face is, I don't quite believe what you're doing, Indio. I don't trust you. He's the brightest of the gang.
He's done now. Prepare to get out of here.
The following morning, two gunfighters wait for the action to start, and this is a dry run for the opening sequence of Once Upon a Time in the West, with the three gunfighters waiting at the station for the noon train to arrive, only the train is 2 hours late, and they pass the time while they're waiting for the moment of violence they know is approaching. So they're sitting there, loading their guns, and there's a kind of parallel in the way they're shot. Shot of Lee Van Cleef, shot of the street, shot of Lee Van Cleef, off to Indio, and there's a kind of, each one gets an equal footage at this time as they kill time waiting for the settling of accounts. That idea would be stretched throughout the whole first reel of Once Upon a Time in the West, with the three pistoleros waiting at Cattle Corner Station for the train which brings Charles Bronson into town. A stretching of time. What do men of action do when they've got nothing to do? They sit there loading their guns. There's an audible sigh from Lee Van Cleef. He's bored. Let's get on with it. We're paid to kill people. It's time something began.
All right, come on now, open it.
Extraordinary use of the soundtrack with this manic laughter as he opens the chest to illustrate the laughing face on the wanted poster. It's nothing to do with Indio laughing. It's a piece of pure decoration to remind us of the lunatic character that he is. A piece of sound design. So the two bounty hunters continue to wait. In this impoverished town, we're south of the border again, Agua Caliente, unlike the affluence of El Paso and of White Rocks. This is the poverty and the underdevelopment of Tucumcari, Santa Cruz and Agua Caliente. They're all run down as places. So they're sitting in this run-down, cobbled main street of this fly-blown Mexican village, waiting for the climax to work itself out. And working as a team for the first time, really, that they've been in rivalry for the first half of the film. They get together, they decide in rather an uneasy way to work together to try and trap Indio and his gang, and here they are really working together strategically in order to take on what's left of Indio's gang. There were 14 of the gang to start with, and the numbers have come down quite considerably thanks to Indio's psychotic behavior. cat at the moment of violence. There had been a cat in A Fistful of Dollars. There's another cat in The Good, the Bad and the Ugly in an equivalent scene in a deserted street. Just putting the sound of a meowing cat when you think there's about to be a moment of violence. A typical Leone gag with Morricone's sound design.
I'll kill them, but I'll rip out their guts first.
I have a plan, Cock.
What?
Let's just wait, Crocky. They'll be back here. And this way there'll be two of us.
Can they come back here? Your men could have killed him.
Who? They?
Are you sure of that, Indio? But they haven't.
So Indio has nothing but contempt for his own gang. Even though they've sprung him from jail, supported him through thick and thin, massacred at his command, robbed the bank at his command, he has nothing but contempt for them at the end. So he not only loathes himself, he loathes his gang as well. The guns in Italian westerns were obviously a very important feature, and after the success of Fistful of Dollars, the traditional craft industries of Brescia in Italy, which had specialized in making firearms for generations, suddenly geared up to produce the weaponry for Italian westerns, producing facsimiles of American weapons of the 19th century, particularly Winchesters and Remingtons and Colts, but also straightening barrels of guns which had been dropped during the shooting. And these were replica guns without rifling in the barrel. They were purely for the use of on movie sets. But a lot of guns get dropped onto stone surfaces in Italian westerns, and they needed to be straightened out in Brescia and then sent back for yet another movie. Indio's relationship with his gun is interesting. He sometimes puts the chamber round and cocks back the hammer and listens. And as we'll see from the final flashback, this gun that he uses in the flashback as well obviously has very personal associations with him. It's part of a trauma that happened in his youth. Benito Stefanelli, who was himself the stunt director and was responsible for a lot of these elaborate and not always that well choreographed stunts, with everyone throwing themselves around in a very gymnastic and physical way. A good example, someone falling through the roof. So as Indio looks at this half-crushed beetle, it's like his gang being crushed by Eastwood and Van Cleef outside, just waiting for the moment, like the Nazi leader sitting in his bunker after the Second World War, waiting for the end. Indio sits in his bunker in his psychopathic way, waiting for the situation to resolve itself, a situation which is largely of his own making. The choreography of these climaxes in Leone's films is extremely complex, and given the fact they weren't storyboarded, it's amazing that they managed to get the continuity so right that just looking at the geography of Los Albericoque and all these characters wandering around in different buildings, all converging on Eastwood and Van Cleef, is an extremely complex piece of logistics, but it works. And now the watch, the chiming pocket watch, with a photo inside it, which will provide the key to the mystery. And this is a musical signature that we're about to have everything revealed.
It's been a long time that I wanted to ask. I can see that it means a lot to you, Indio. Why?
Second flashback, out of focus, like the beginning of the flashback in Once Upon a Time in the West. We're back in the bedroom with the dark-haired girl and the young man, with Indio standing there looking at them. Indio shoots the young man again. Goes up to the girl. The screen goes red. He's raping the girl, or attempting to. But she takes his gun, that gun that he's been listening to throughout the film. Is she going to shoot him? She can't, because he's still alive. She shoots herself. So amid all the slaughter that Indio's been responsible for since, this moment sticks in his mind. A sexual act interrupted by a suicide, a deep, deep trauma, and that's the memory he dredges out when he smokes marijuana and when he has his fantasies throughout the film. And Colonel Mortimer's calling to him as the pocket watch chimes. There's some connection between Colonel Mortimer and the watch.
Douglas Mortimer! Does the name mean anything to you?
Most of the second flashback was in fact missing from the original British print and a lot of international prints. It was thought to be too strong. But in the absence of that, the entire motivation of Indio doesn't make any sense at all. It may be an extreme sequence, but it explains a lot about his psychopathic behavior. There's a hint that maybe since then Indio has been impotent as well. And so we build up to the first of the fully fledged Leone corrida, the bullfight, the circular arena, the duel, making the duel or the settling of accounts, which a lot of Westerns contained, into a pure piece of cinematic style. Not much dialogue, not much talk, just building up towards this meeting of the two protagonists, the two main protagonists in this arena of destiny. So Indio has disarmed the colonel. And lots of matching shots from behind the silhouette of a character and then cut to the other protagonist they're facing. And there will be matching shots in rhythm for this duel. So again, the music stops, this time not a Bach toccata, but the chiming watch, which turns into the same musical theme as the Bach toccata, but this time played on mariachi trumpet with strumming guitar, a Mexican dirge, a Mexican funeral dirge. Now clearly the dice are loaded. Indio has his gun at his waist. Mortimer has to pick up his gun. Indio's going to win this duel, unless something happens. And this leads towards a moment which actually is derived from the Anthony Mann film, The Tin Star, where Henry Fonda is standing there with a shotgun in his hand, watching a duel, Anthony Perkins as the young sheriff and Neville Brand as the bad guy, and making sure that fair play happens. Somebody's going to make sure that fair play happens this time so that Mortimer can prove his professionalism. The music's about to stop, and it starts again with another watch. There's a matching watch. There are two of them. And Mortimer feels in his pocket because it's his watch. So both of them have pocket watches, both of them have chimes, both of them have the same photograph in it. And the Clint Eastwood character wants to referee this to make sure that at least they have a sporting chance with each other. Amplified Spanish guitar, Indio's theme, with the chiming watch and castanets. Don't try it, Indio. So it's like a triangular duel, only it isn't. One of them's the referee, one of them's the bad guy, one of them's the good guy. And the old man has to prove what he's capable of. But Eastwood's not going to shoot anybody. He's just going to make sure that this duel works properly. By the time of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, this had turned into a triangular duel where all three are out to shoot one another. The music builds up with the castanets, with the Spanish guitar, held close to the microphone. We're going to have an anthem played on a trumpet for this duel, which by the time of The Good, the Bad, the Ugly will last the best part of a reel. Circular arena, the three of them, just like the climax of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And just like it too, this gypsy trumpet with Mexican backing on the soundtrack, pumping up this idea of the degeo, the funeral dirge. It was something Leone couldn't get out of his system. He loved the idea of this south-of-the-border funeral dirge illustrating his sequences. He tried it in The Fistful of Dollars, he tried it here, and he tried it again at the end of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. This time mixed with all the other musical themes as well. In fact, a working title for the film was Carillon, meaning bells, meaning chiming watch. After it was called The Bounty Killer, it was called Carillon briefly, and then it became known as For a Few Dollars More. Indio overacts even when he's shot.
Bravo.
That's the second time the Eastwood character has said bravo. The first time, you remember, with the shooting of the apples as they arrived in Agua Caliente, and they look at each other as two professionals sizing each other up. The Colonel has it in him to defeat Indio in a fair fight, in a duel. Bravo. And he wants his watch back. And what's extraordinary, given how much rides on this, is how quickly the plot is explained with just one line in a second. And it's explained in such a way to show that the Colonel is a moral man, much more moral than the man with no name.
There seems to be a family resemblance. Here.
Naturally, between brother and sister.
So the girl who killed herself was Mortimer's sister. The man who was shot by Indio was Mortimer's brother-in-law. And the whole film has been about a vendetta with Mortimer trying to get Indio for being responsible for his sister's death. So like those characters in Bud Bedecker films in the 1950s, those old films with Randolph Scott in Hollywood, in the end, Mortimer is a moral man. There are some things you just can't ride around. A man's got to do what a man's got to do. He's had a mission, and at last he's accomplished it. So Eastwood can keep the money. He's the hip, he's the trickster, he's the 1960s bounty hunter. But Mortimer is a traditional Hollywood Western character, and the music, the orchestral music, interspersed with the chimes of the watch, signals this is a traditional moment. In fact, this musical theme is called Goodbye, Colonel. And now comes one of the great gags in the movie, which was actually written by Sergio Donati after the script was completed by Luciano Vincenzoni. Eastwood's adding up the bounty on all the characters of Indio's gang, but it's not quite adding up to the amount he wanted.
27. Any trouble, boy? No, old man. Thought I was having trouble with my adding. It's all right now.
Thought I was having trouble with my adding. Make my day, do you feel lucky, all begins with that line, this throwaway line of Clint Eastwood, as the Colonel rides off into the sunset in time-honoured Hollywood fashion. Eastwood gets his mathematics right. 1965 was a hell of a year for Sergio Leone with this film. When the film came out in December 1965, it became the most successful movie that had ever come out in Italy, a position it held till the 1970s. It was the year that Leone's mentor, Mario Bonnard, a veteran Italian film director and actor, died in his mid-70s, and he was like a father figure to Leone, and he died just as his film was being released. This was the moment when the Italian Western was really born, and the idea of a distinctive Italian style of Western actually came into its own. And believe it or not, it was the first movie that Leone had signed in Italy, because Fistful of Dollars had come out under a pseudonym, the pseudonym of Bob Robertson. But with Fistful of Dollars, Leone was able to put his own name on a movie as a major director of European cinema. So 65 was the annus mirabilis for Sergio Leone, and his career would never look back. And Clint Eastwood not only gets the bounty money for Indio's gang, but he also cleans up with the money from El Paso in the saddlebags. Is he going to keep it? Well, in a Hollywood movie, he'd give it back. But this being an Italian Western, the likelihood is that the man with no name is going to keep the loot.